Well, today's show, I got two of my favorites. I don't say that about everybody, but these guys have been on with me for many years on my syndicated radio talk show throughout the state of Florida. Our legal commentators, Lindsey Brock and Ron Davis. And both of these guys have been, not just legal analysts who I could talk about issues no matter what here in the state of Florida, but also election attorneys as well that have seen it. A couple of the things I want to talk about today. This week, the state of Florida meets for the whole redistricting process. I don't know if this is going to benefit the GOP like they think it's going to benefit nationwide. We'll address that issue. Also, I want to talk about the whole marijuana with the Trump White House now says we're going to kind of lessen it to a less potent drug. We're not going to put it with LSD, PCP, or all that kind of crap. And cocaine, we're going to make it where we can try to have medical benefits for that. So we will address that. So I'm going to get into with Ron Davis and Lindsey Brock. So let me play for you the latest clip. This is from Fox News' Mark Meredith. What is about to take place this week, where the governor says that he wants to pick up the original was like 1 to 2 seats. Now they're talking about maybe 5 seats here in the state of Florida. Listen to this clip. This is from Fox News' Mark Meredith.
Republicans who firmly control the state house and governor's mansion are expected to meet in Tallahassee to consider new maps, likely giving the GOP an additional 3 to 5 House seats. The Democratic Super PAC announced it'll spend at least $20 million on TV and digital ads in Florida, its first investment in the state in 6 years, as Democrats insist Florida is in play. Multiple states have redrawn maps mid-decade. So far, the process, strongly supported by President Trump, has given neither party a major advantage for November.
All right, Lindsey, let me start with you. First off, before I get into the whole redistricting process, do Democrats going to spend $20 million here in the state of Florida? Do Democrats really think the state is in play?
They do, and I think a lot of it stems from, if they're going to do this redistricting as vigorously as you were talking about, what they're actually doing is putting some other really solid red districts are now going to be a little bit more marginalized because they're trying to recapture some of those Republican voters into other adjacent districts.
So here's a couple other clips I want to play. This came from Alicia Finley, one of my favorites at the Wall Street Journal. She says, while the GOP may think it may benefit them, she says there's a lot of safe seats that may be up for grabs that now the Democrats, and she says, which I remind everybody all the time, Ron Davis, you can't keep equivalating Republicans versus Democrat. Your biggest other group out there are registered independents here in the state of Florida. Listen to what she said about that.
However, Democrats are pretty concentrated and compact in these urban areas. So if Republicans were to try to squeeze out another few seats, they could potentially spread Republicans too thin and result in actually more Democratic seats in a blue wave. And so if you reduce the margins and you're seeing that independents are overwhelmingly shifting to the Democratic Party now, you really risk actually losing on net more seats by trying to get a little greedy and add a few more Republican seats.
Yeah. So let me go back here. This started with Texas. I don't care what the spin is. Texas was the first state to redraw their districts. Then when California and then New York said they were going to do it, then Virginia and Utah and Florida, it's become a cluster mess. But she says that there is probably a Democratic wave, depending if you still buy into that. It's possible it could happen here, Ron. Now we're going into May. So the question is, does this whole redistricting process, who does it help out overall, or does it just become a wash at the end?
I think it becomes a wash at the end if affordability is the main issue. I think the independents look at this and they say Republicans started it and kind of blame them for it. But I think most voters are more interested in who's going to help us out with our affordability issues, our, eggs, bread, cheese, right, gas. And, that was the problem the Republicans had beforehand, is that they did not appear as if they were trying to solve these problems, and they're kicking them down the road. Voters have short memories. I mean, how could they go back to look at the 4 years of Biden and say we want to go back to that?
Right.
But the reality of it is Republicans have not made their lives better like they were promised. So,
Lindsey, think about it. It's the only way to gain seats is no longer by winning the ideas or the marketplace of ideas. It's now become hey, let's redraw the districts. Oh, we don't get what we want. Let's redraw them again. Let's redraw them again. Lindsey, is there a viable argument? And I'm not saying there isn't, but I still like the fact that you redraw the seats once every 10 years, not 3 or 4 times, is what's being talked about. I understand. And by the way, this was done not under Biden. This was done under President Trump about the counting when it came to the ballots. They kind of shortened the process. They didn't want to count non-citizens. I get that. They didn't want to count illegal immigrants. I get that as well. But there were a lot of people that were moving to Florida. There were people still moving to Florida in 2022, 2023. So is the argument by some of those on my side in the Republican aisle fair enough to sit back and say, we had to go in and redraw the districts because the amount of people that moved to the states instead of waiting to 2030?
Well, yeah, that's exactly the rationale that they gave for it. The problem is it opens up a door now to where if the Democrats sit there and go, well, we think that there's been more, non-affiliated party people that are here. We've got this, we've got that. And it just becomes an excuse to go in and do this redistricting and redraw the districts to benefit the party that's in power.
Yeah, that's how I'm looking at it. So, Ron, what happens at the end of the day with this whole redistricting?
Well, if right now there's more Republican states. So if the Republican states all did what they've done in the Northeast of the United States and New England, we'd end up with a lot more Republican representation. But you've got, states like Indiana saying, no, we're not going to do this. I mean, look, we're coming up to the election term. I mean, it's almost too late. I think Florida's going to be the last state that does anything. There's really not much more the Democrats have in the tank in terms of reserve states to do this. So I think Florida's where it ends. But again, people don't care about the redistricting. They see this as gamesmanship. And I think both parties take a hit on this issue. I think just talking to people out there, independents are frustrated that no one seems to be interested in solving problems. They just try to create their own.
Lindsey, I'm not a big fan of some of the stuff that was being proposed by Virginia, but I know some of my Republican friends are angry about that. But I want to remind them that the Constitution says pretty much whoever owns the state legislature, which is the Democrats of Virginia, can pretty much draw the maps. The same complaints that Republicans are making about Virginia, Democrats are making about here in the state of Florida.
Well, yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, there are very few limitations, and the Supreme Court's got a case now as to whether race is a valid one to include in there. So yeah, I mean, it is one to where the party that's in power has the ability to draw the maps, just like states have the rights for the time and manner of elections.
So, Lindsey, what happens? Let's say that the governor tries to get 3 to 5 seats, depending if the state or House Republicans go along with, and that's a pretty big task. But Lindsey, what happens with all the court cases? OMG, does it go anywhere? Does it stay with the state Supreme Court? Educate the audience. Does it go to the U.S. Supreme Court? How long will this take? Or will they kick the can down the road, and the U.S. Supreme Court may not decide to make a decision for a couple of years down the road?
Well, I think the Supreme Court is definitely going to be wanting to make a decision on this before the November election. They want to get that out there so that a lot of these districts and everything are clearly set out and defined. But gosh, yes, there is going to be lawsuits galore coming out of this with the redistricting. We've seen it in every state that's done it. The Democratic Party has filed lawsuits challenging the basis of the redistricting and how they were drawn up and why they were drawn up. But essentially, the law is, hey, you can do it for political purposes. There's no constitutional right to have a certain number of Democrats in a district.
Yeah, on that case as well.
But also, there's no constitutional right to have a certain number of Republicans. And that's what the Republicans got to remember, is that this could come back and bite them in the end.
Yeah, I mean, Ron, the safe districts for some of these Republicans is not to be drawn into more urban areas or some of the other South Florida districts, and that kind of makes them more vulnerable. They want to be in safe districts they don't have to campaign on. And if you're trying to go up some of those Democratic seats down there, you got a little bit of a Democratic movement. If you look at some of the elections over the last year, that I don't know if even some Republicans would want to go along with this.
Clearly, someone's thought this out in advance, and they feel pretty confident that we can pick up the 5 seats. Just touching a little bit on what you and Lindsey were saying before, it's a double-edged sword for both parties, ultimately on a national scale, Ed. You know, if the Supreme Court weighs in on this again and they rule in favor, Democrats could face a problem in New England where everything is based solely on party. It could upend everything. And then, I mean, how do you change things a month or a half before election that may have been in place for years? So, I mean, I think the Supreme Court has already kind of addressed this when Texas first, proposed it. So I think it's going to slide through this year. I think where the big fights are going to be, and I know you wanted to talk on here now, but I think the big fight's going to be during the census in a few years.
Yeah, I think you're right. Can I talk about, since we're on about elections redistricting, Kash Patel from the FBI, he's the FBI director, was on with Maria Bartiromo from the Fox Business Network. So Maria asked the question about 2020, because the president, everywhere he goes to this day, I mean, you could talk about trying to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and the president somehow will invoke 2020 elections. Patel says that they've got investigations going on. Listen to the clip.
Because every time I see President Trump, he says this repeatedly, that the election was rigged in 2020. I mean, he says it all the time. We all know that. And it's almost getting lost because he says it so much. You've been at the FBI now 14 months. Have you done anything about that? And do you have anything to tell us about that?
Yes. So what we are doing is folding that into our entire conspiracy case, and we will let the prosecution speak for him. But we have the information that backs President Trump's claim. But because it's an ongoing prosecution investigation, I can't get ahead of the DOJ and the president. President Trump speaks truthfully when he says that.
All right, let me focus on this one, Ron. We played this on my radio show. We played this here on Florida Daily Show. You remember a couple months ago, Glenn Beck came on, and a lot of other people in the MAGA base wasn't happy with Pam Bondi. They've given her a year. Where are their arrests? And I'm not saying that Kash Patel needs to go anywhere. I'm just saying is that the same crowd that wanted Bondi's head on the platter isn't asking for Kash Patel's head on the platter. And he keeps saying, well, we got ongoing investigations. 2020, I mean, is there anything there?
Who knows? But who cares? I think, isn't that the more important question? You know, we started out this segment by talking about the independents and how important they are. The independents don't care. You know, This is not an issue at their forefront. And the more time that either party spends on this issue is bad, I think. I just think the independents get the sense you just don't care if you're discussing it. Kash Patel, I mean, investigations start there in the FBI. The DOJ decides whether or not to file charges. So, why Pam Bondi get in trouble and not Kash? I don't know.
Lindsey, I think Ron's right. Nobody cares about this anymore.
No one does. It's old news. And, and Trump, he's really good at this. He simply says the election was rigged. Okay. That means all kinds of different things to all kinds of different people. To the MAGA, they think that there were fake ballots, that there were ballots that were lost, there were ballots that were brought in, that it was this grand, big, nationwide conspiracy, with the whole Dominion voting, but all of that stuff. But Trump is able to use that fervor to motivate his base by just simply saying it was rigged, without any specifics.
Yeah, I could spend another hour on this issue. But one of them, we've got a story. Lindsey, let me start with you first on our next topic. We're going to have a story coming out probably the next week, maybe the next couple weeks I'm working on, that as much as the True Leave and the Smart Safe crowd that wanted to get the marijuana initiative, Amendment 3, back on the ballot for 2026, I think could be something that I wonder if the state's going to take up before 2028, or they don't want to take a position on it because, the recreational marijuana is still a hot issue here in the state of Florida, which I'm kind of curious. So I wonder if it would have passed this year. I'll get you guys' take on that. But the story that we're going to talk about is that the marijuana issue isn't going anywhere. And the president made sure of that over the last week. Listen to the clip. This is from Fox News. I got two clips here. Mark Meredith, where the White House has now said we're going to make it more of a lesser drug. We're going to reclassify it. And I wonder what that does here in the state of Florida. Here's clip number 1.
Marijuana companies like TrueLeaf have lobbied the Trump administration to reschedule the drug and study and expand its use to treat conditions like Parkinson's, stomach issues, and insomnia. The rescheduling also allows marijuana businesses to claim federal tax deductions. There is opposition.
The president claims to be so anti-drug. I just don't know why that he's essentially, with this order, become the most pro-drug president in our history.
Opponents argue Americans are already using marijuana at record rates.
It's linked to psychosis, schizophrenia, brain volume changes, heart attacks, stroke, on and on, reproductive changes.
While today's announcement affects cannabis produced under state medical licenses, the administration is moving to reclassify marijuana more broadly and to potentially relax regulations, though short of legalizing it for recreation at the federal level.
Now,
Republican.
let me stop right there. Lindsey, the medical purposes I'm all in favor of. I go to my Baptist church, Lindsey, of 16, 70-year-olds that love the products, the oil-based products. I'm not talking about them getting high off the THC, but the medical benefits I don't have a problem with. But you got a lot of hardliners in social conservative movements that don't want anything that would come across as though it benefits the movement forward for marijuana.
Well, yeah, and there is a valid reason to explore the medical uses of it. But what I would rather see is, let's take the weed and make it a medicine, make it into a medicine, instead of, well, it's medical marijuana, I'm going to roll a joint and smoke it out here, when that's got all kinds of bad health benefits or health issues there of smoking. Because I mean, you're burning something and you're inhaling smoke into your body. But if there's a real valid way to turn it into medicine, I think we ought to be looking at that.
Ron, I've always been curious if this is just nothing more than a slap at American culture where, again, if you can have the benefits of not trying to get high off the inhaling, as Lindsey just parted out, the smoking area of the THC, but you could take it in the pill form, then what's wrong with that?
Well, I mean, based on what we've been seeing just on the medical side of things for the last, 10 years, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with that. Like you pointed out, people at your Baptist church are singing the praises of CBD and other marijuana and hemp. So I think that as time has gone on, it bears it out. The problem is we talked about this when they first started on the amendments here in Florida, trying to get them passed. It was never about the medicinal purposes. That crowd has always been about recreational. Period. If they just admitted it, it might make the whole argument easier for them. But to keep trying to hide behind medicine, and no matter what you do, as long as these amendments are, I guess, based on medicine or medicinal purposes, we will keep seeing this initiative come up every election cycle because they want recreational.
Hey, Ron, real quick, before I go to Lindsey, do you think, because it failed with 57% of the vote in a presidential election in 2024, do you think if they would have had it on the ballot for this year, it might have passed? The the recreational marijuana?
Well, that's a tough one. I really don't know, because it's about affordability, and I'm not hearing people scream and cry that their pot's not affordable. I'm hearing them cry about their gas and stuff. So I don't know if that would be viewed as a distraction, or if it would have been a legitimate issue. But I hadn't thought of it. But
what do you think, Lindsey? You think Ron's honest? I don't know. I'm a little torn. Lindsey, you think it could have gotten to 60% if it was on the ballot this year?
I think if they had spent the kind of money that they did last time, and when it wasn't when it was a presidential election, if they spent that same for this past time, I think it likely would have, because you're not going to have as strong a voter turnout. So what are you going to do? You're going to motivate those people that really want it to show up at the polls, who may or may not show up anyway. So I think when you got an election that has a lower voter turnout, but they pump the ads like they did last time, I think there's a likely chance that it could have made its way through the ballot.
Lindsey, listen to my analysis and Ron, give me your take. Lindsey, let me start with you. If medical marijuana was a used car company in an area, no new car manufacturers or no new car being sold, just used cars, You own that market. Secondary, I'm trying to follow me. Medical marijuana is not recreational, medical purposes whatsoever. And then you find out, well, wait a second. Now the new and improved car sales comes into town. No more used cars, brand new cars. Now you view the used car lot, you're going, my gosh, I don't want to deal with the competition. The medical marijuana is like the used car. Would you not think they probably would not want full-blown recreation? Wouldn't it hurt their business, or am I off on that?
No, I think they would simply change from medical to recreational. They would simply take off the RX off the front door and put a good old pot leaf out there and say, come and get it.
Yeah, Ron, the White House, which you've heard the clip, which is now going to make it more of a lesser drug compared to others. What does that happen and do here in the state of Florida? You're going to have a new governor that's going to end up being here within less than a year. Do you think there's any type of legislation, or do you think there's just too much chickens or too many of these guys and gals that don't want to take a position where instead of trying to go down the path of whatever recreational light bill to be passed, they're just going to wait for 2028 to get it back on the ballot?
Yes, they will. I guess with him making it a Schedule III drug, I think you're going to have more of a boring regulatory process filtering down from the feds to the state. It's not going to change too much in the way the states are, especially the states that have moved towards medicinal marijuana anyway. I think you're going to see a lining of the federal and state interests to the extent that where they're at. But in terms of will it really change much here in Florida, or will it require additional legislation? No, I think you're right. I think it's going to flesh out in a couple of years. That's when they'll address any of the shortcomings.
You know, Lindsey, I have seen counties, my years as a reporter here in Florida, I've seen counties pass bills to charter administrations or charter bills that are charter amendments, or pass a tax increase in a non-election season. And they've either passed or they failed, depending on what the outcome is and the flavor of the year is. Is it possible that they may try to put a special amendment for 2027 and get that on the ballot for next year? Is that very unlikely?
I think that's probably unlikely, on that. But, going back to Ron's statement about the dropping it down to a Schedule III, I think that's going to have, and this may be, Trump's thought, but that's going to have a pretty big impact, I would think, with the criminal justice system, because harsher sentences that were handed out when it was Schedule I narcotic, or considered essentially that, those crimes had a lot stiffer penalties. And I think that's how you're going to see it, the main effect with putting it to a Schedule III.
Ron, if you were advising the marijuana crowd, and you had said this on our radio show, that 3%, you get a lot of groups in that 3%, the reason why it didn't pass in 2024. One of them that you had said was, because you're a lawyer, you guys kind of know what the marketplace, you got clients, you talk to people, was that, and I couldn't believe you told me this, but maybe the number's big enough in some areas in the state of Florida. If I'm not mistaken, didn't you tell us when you said that people weren't going to vote in favor of it when they found out they couldn't sell it and make a couple of bucks? Explain that to the audience.
No, so there's a crowd of the marijuana users that want this to be recreational. And when they were hoping they could grow it, cultivate it in their own, not necessarily sell it, but grow their own and use their own. And when they learned that that's not what would happen, remember the old big marijuana commercials? It was big, parroting, the big tobacco. They bought into that hook, line, and sinker, saying, no, it's all corporations making the money. We want to be able to grow it and use it ourselves. They wanted that freedom. When they learned it was really going to become corporate owned, they wanted no part of it.
Lindsey, let me the same question I asked Ron, not this one. Is it possible with the new governor that the state may try to address this issue, or do you think, hey, they're just going to kowtow and leave them for a ballot initiative in 2 years?
Yeah, I think they're not going to touch it. I think the best you're going to see is, like I said, is some alignment with the criminal liability, with it being dropped to a Schedule III. But other than that, I do not think they're going to see any movement to put it on the ballot or anything like that through the legislature.
I got a couple of minutes here. If Florida goes down the path, and the word meaningful, I don't want something crappy. I mean, and we can talk about this another time. What is the word meaningful of property tax reform? Lindsey, let me start with you. If it passes, there are going to be avenues for people to look to raise money. They tried to push the recreational marijuana as a way to raise revenue. They kind of did it a little bit late. They wait till the summertime. And if it would have been May, I would have gone much earlier. But does that become an avenue maybe to pass it? Because cities are going to be crying, the sky is going to fall. We need more revenue.
Well, yeah, I mean, that obviously would be a big push if they're sitting there saying that there's going to be, some significant property tax reform to where, as Paul Renner was talking about, that it was going to be, he had a plan that was completely going to abolish it. Right. And if you start doing that, you're going to have to find other means of revenue. Me personally, we've talked about it several times. I don't think there's going to be anything meaningful. I think you're going to see some adjustment of the homestead exemption, something that maybe benefits veterans and the elderly.
But Lindsey, hold on. You get the argument that, hey guys, you vote for marijuana. Yep. 2028, we got the tax situation all solved. Raise money. Yeah,
you could wrap it all together and say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get rid of your property tax. We're going to legalize marijuana, and we're going to tax it to make up the shortfall that we have from the property taxes.
A couple of minutes here left. Ron, I think the only thing, and on the table, unless I'm thinking of something else, it's either offshore drilling, which isn't going to happen, sports gambling, which I think could happen if there's something done about the Seminole tribe, or marijuana. I think your sports gambling is probably the easiest route to talk about raising revenue if you're going to have to suffice for cities and counties and school districts not raising enough money. Or does the marijuana initiative actually come into play in 2028 as a way to raise revenue?
Yeah, but you run into the same problem then. If it's solely as a revenue generating, and it keeps it with corporations paying the taxes and being the tax collectors, the same crowd that didn't vote it in the last time is going to be the same crowd that doesn't vote it in again if you make it about taxation. They don't want that. They just want to be able to grow it and use it. They don't want to hear that they're going to be taxed on it. So I still think it fails on the same basis. And another thing too is I don't know how it works under your scenario, only because marijuana in its current form is taxed by the state. So right. The local governments wouldn't be collecting any of that anyway unless it flows through the state.
Yeah, but that can all be redone. That's what I'm getting.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I'm not hearing anybody in the legislature say.
Well, no, you're not going to. No, not right now. But, well, listen, you can catch these guys on my radio show throughout the week. Lindsey Brock and Ron Davis. I always enjoy having you guys come on. You keep things simple. I always enjoy the conversation, and I'm glad all of you came on today on the Florida Daily Show. Thanks, Lindsey. Thanks, Ron.
Always an honor. Thanks.
All right, man. All right. Good discussion. And both of these guys, again, you can catch all the time here on the Florida Daily, and of course also on the radio show. By the way, just a little FYI, you can catch my statewide syndicated radio show mornings from 6 to 9. Now, it's hurting a boatload of other markets throughout the state, but mornings from 6 to 9 on Talk Radio WBOB. You can download the app. It is free. We don't charge you anything. Go to WBOB.com. We're going to have more coming up this week, but thanks so much for tuning in on another edition of the Florida Daily Show. I'm your host, publisher, Ed Dean.